Now, this is what pisses me off about the Republican debates. As they're going to say, they're in Detroit, and we're an hour and 22 minutes into this damn debate, and this is the first time they're going to bring up a question about Detroit or even, a social issue.
We are here in Detroit. The top issues in Michigan, according to Facebook, are displayed in a word cloud you're taking a look at. The second biggest issue is clean water. That, of course, is directly tied to the situation in Flint. Senator Rubio, Bernie Sanders, and Hillary Clinton have both been to Flint. They were both running ads in this state focusing on that, focusing on supporting Flint and fixing the problems, showing images of people in Flint thankful that they're there. Without getting into the political blame game here, where are the national Republicans' plans on infrastructure and solving problems like this? If you talk to people in this state, they are really concerned about Flint on both sides of the aisle. So why haven't GOP candidates done more or talked more about this?
Well, I know I've talked about it, and others in our campaign have talked about it,
He's a lying ass. I scanned looking for these guys talking about the Flint crisis. If they said more than one sentence, that was enough. Now, the only one that actually said more than two sentences was Cruz, and he only basically said 3. So Rubio's full of shit, and he doesn't actually even answer the damn question. Where the hell are the Republicans as far as Flint's concerned? You know why they're not saying anything? It's because Governor Rick Snyder, who's a Republican, is under supreme fire, and they're getting ready to mount an effort to recall him. So these guys aren't going to say a damn thing about Rick Snyder, who's really the one that was responsible, though it was his emergency manager that actually drew up the plans that fucked everybody.
Candidates have talked about it as well. What happened in Flint was a terrible thing. It was systemic breakdown at every level of government, at both the federal and partially at both the state and partially at the federal level as well. And by the way, the politicizing of it, I think, is unfair, because I don't think that someone woke up one morning and said, let's figure out how to poison the water system.
No, they woke up one morning and said, how can we save money? And everybody who knew anything about the goddamn Flint River knew that that river was highly toxic. So the fucking the emergency manager, woke up one morning and said, oh, hey, look, instead of making sure that people's water, is clear and pure and it can be used, let's go to this bullshit thing, water that pretty much everybody around here knows sucks, and save ourselves a couple of $1 million. Oh, and on top of it, we were told that if we treated the water when it came through here for $100 a day, that might help to alleviate some problems. Fuck you, Marco Rubio. Yeah, somebody did wake up one morning and decide that they were going to poison the people of Flint, Michigan.
Hurt someone, but accountability is important. I will say I give the governor credit. He took responsibility for what happened, and he's talked about people being held accountable and the need to change this, Governor Snyder. But here's the point. This should not be a partisan issue. The way the Democrats have tried to turn this into a partisan issue, that somehow Republicans woke up in the morning and decided, oh, it's a good idea to poison some kids with lead. It's absurd. It's outrageous. It isn't true. All of us are outraged by what happened, and we should work together to solve it. And there is a proper role for the government to play at the federal level in helping local communities to respond to a catastrophe of this kind, not just to deal with the people that have been impacted by it, but to ensure that something like this never happens again.
Yeah, and then why didn't you bring up the name of your fucking buddy Ted Cruz? Because the federal government is attempting to get money into Flint to the tune of approximately 200 and I believe it's $40 million. But the committee that appropriation has to come through has one member that says he must review everything, and that member is Ted fucking Cruz. So you should have turned over and asked Ted why he hadn't reviewed that legislation to get that money to the people of Flint. And with that being said, nobody else is going to be asked a question about Flint.
Kasich, the city of Detroit has long suffered with urban blight, broken streetlights, dilapidated and vacant houses, and so on. In 2013, Detroit actually declared bankruptcy, which helped, but the schools here remain a big problem. They're $3.5 billion in debt and are some of the most troubled and poorly testing in the country. The kids too often go to classrooms that are unsafe, falling apart, infested with rodents and insects. Experts say the schools could go bankrupt by next month. Question to you, if the federal government bailed out the auto industry here in Detroit, should it also bail out the Detroit schools?
Okay, just for those of you that want to know, okay, and he's going to basically use Cleveland as an example of the right thing to do. The city of Detroit's always been Democratic. The governor of Michigan has been a Republican for quite a while. The city of Detroit rendered services to the state of Michigan, which was payable by the state, and the governor refused to pay the fucking money. Okay, so that was one part of the problem. The other part of the problem basically is that the people that lived in Detroit, white people now, decided to move out. Okay, that reduced the amount of tax revenue that the city of Detroit was able to generate. At the same time, the city of Detroit had some pretty nice pension plans for its government workers. Well, it got to the point where there was a large imbalance in the amount of tax revenues coming in and the amount of payments for things such as pensions and medical payments going out. And those two things, people moving out and reducing the base and increasing the amount of payments going out, that created a lot of Detroit's problems. Now, the Detroit school system is a completely different animal, okay? The Detroit school system had floated a bond of approximately $1.5 billion, okay, in order to do quite a few things, primarily to handle the updates in the infrastructures of the school, bring computers in, take care of all the problems that the schools had, okay? It was at that point that Governor Snyder decided to appoint an emergency manager for the Detroit school system, okay? Now, also at that point, the Detroit school system was highly solvent. I mean, highly solvent. They were running budget surpluses of approximately $450 million a year. After the manager was appointed, they all of a sudden start running deficits. And I'm still waiting for them to release where that $1.5 billion went to in that bond issue that is part of the problem that's causing them to have a deficit. Now, there is word out on the street that the emergency manager got money distributed to cronies and political hacks that basically had owed the governor favors, and we still don't know where that money went. So with that being said, that's what the problem is with the Detroit schools. And there are tons of articles about all of the issues that the schools have, and why that school district has to file bankruptcy. That is laid directly at the hands of the governor and his emergency manager. Now let's watch Kasich dance around and talk about Cleveland.
Well, look, first of all, I think the mayor now is controlling the schools. This is not much different than what happened in Cleveland, Ohio, where the African-American Democrat mayor...
And he's right. He's right. They just got the emergency manager out of the Detroit schools, and I mean just like within the last 30 days. And that emergency manager was Darrell Early. If that name rings a bell, he was the same emergency manager that turned on the switch that created the problem in Flint.
Union and business leaders came to see me and said, would you help us to pass legislation to really create a CEO environment so that we can take control of the schools? We even invested in a buyout plan where we bought out the teachers who had been there a long time because there were so many young teachers who had been laid off who were so enthusiastic to get back in the schools. It worked beautifully. Cleveland's coming back. The Cleveland schools are coming back because of a major overhaul. It's the same thing that has to happen in all of our urban schools. And frankly, look, if I were president, I'd take 104 federal programs, bundle them into 4 buckets, and send it to the states, because fixing schools rests at the state and the local level, and particularly at the school board level.
Now, I'm going to agree with him there, but he's being disingenuous, because it was the emergency manager that fucked up the Detroit school system. Again, they were running at a surplus, and when that guy got in there, all of a sudden $1.5 billion fucking disappeared, and there's no money in order to fix up the schools, to pay teachers, etc. So he's full of shit when he's trying to lay it off on Democrats. That was a Republican initiative, and that was directly at the hands of Darnell Early and his predecessors. Because what was going on here was the state, an emergency manager is only able to serve 18 months in that position, and then the emergency management situation is by law null and void. Okay, the city people, whoever's in control, is able to take control back. But if you resign one day before the full 18 months is up, the governor is able to assign a new emergency manager who gets a new 18 months. The governor has done this for 5 straight periods of 18 months. So this is bullshit as far as this being the responsibility of Democrats. This is Governor Snyder's baby. His fingerprints are all over this shit. And now, you know, he's been under so much pressure, and Early's been under so much pressure for fucking up, you know, helping to fuck up 2 situations.
I also believe that you need to introduce vocational education in those schools. You need mentoring in those schools. And you need to have a situation where people can have an alternative form to get a degree. And you need school choice, both vouchers and charter schools. All of those things can come together to help Megan. And here's the bottom line, and I'll go quickly. We as adults have to fight in our neighborhoods, in our communities, for our children's education. Put the politics aside, and everyone in this room can play a role in lifting their schools and lifting the students who are in those schools, because too much politics gets in the middle of it, and where we focus as adults and put children first, we see tremendous results. And the people of this town are going to rise, and they need to be involved. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's too bad that fucking Governor Snyder didn't listen to that, but they saw $1.5 billion, and they used the emergency manager situation to get their hands on that fucking money.